I actually went out on the bike yesterday. I went to the water, did a bit of bird watching for the seabirds that live around here. And there was this sort of stone just about 30 metres out, rock. And I was looking through binoculars. I was amazed at how many different varieties of birds were on there. It was only about 2-3 metres square, this rock. And there were about 5 different varieties of birds. I mean, like some big birds, small birds, some gulls, ducks, pigeons, behind there was a cormorant, all sorts of different, Now, obviously, I could be very glib and I could say, well, how come that these fairly different bird species can live quite happily together just on that same tiny rock? Didn't seem to be destroying each other, and yet the human species can't manage it. Well, of course, that is a little bit of a, as I said, glib observation. I would argue it's because we are a failed animal. We're an unpleasant, aggressive, appalling, tortured disease. But, most people wouldn't agree with that. That's fair enough. Anyway, it did make me think a little bit about the fact that that there is now in effect a civil war going on. Let's look at the UK with the two distinct groups of Brexiteers and Remainers. These are, it was about 50-50 during the vote. And, I guess, in any particular pub, you're probably going to have 50% who believe in Brexit, the concept of Brexit, and then 50% who are, who think Brexit is crazy and want to remain and think we should be part of Europe. Now, these two distinct groups, which we could say are very similar to, say, the Democrats and the Republicans in the US, and it would be the same across Europe as well. Let's not go into all of the different countries and the similar polarization that's happening between two large groups of people. And of course, at the heart of this is things like woke and anti-woke. These are areas which have also tacked on to these sort of political entities which are kind of separating with this huge chasm in between, and also the idea that green issues is a good idea and anti-climate, conspiracy and science, whatever. The point is that there are now two distinct groups. Now these two distinct groups, they're not in opposition ideologically. They despise each other. They hate each other. They think that the other group are actually evil, and they believe that the other part are either completely stupid and ignorant, or that they are an enemy that is seeking to destroy them. Or destroy the country for some reason. So this is a phenomenon that's happened recently, and it would be interesting to try and get to the bottom of why this has happened, and if there is anything that one can do about it. My own feeling is that this is a permanent rupture, and it's probably based on let's try and bring it down as simple as possible. And I think I might have mentioned this before. If you imagine civilization, the movements of societies over the centuries as being the idea, and this was up until recently, up until 1975-80, the idea that somehow there was a heaven or a utopia towards which we were going. And that the things that we did as a society were small things that would contribute to this progressive travel to the future. And a future that somehow had an end to it, which was rosy, if not utopian. There was this idea, and we were going somewhere. And you can trace kind of recent history of the last 500 years on this trajectory. But this trajectory, of course, was built on values and ideas. Fundamentally ideas about science, ideas about fairness, ideas about equality, and the absence of slavery and bringing women into the picture, enabling them to vote. That was only 100 years ago. Enabling women to own property, this kind of thing. So we were kind of heading that way. Now, I think you've got to imagine, in a way, that there was tension always on this journey. So imagine that this path, it's like an elastic band. You're on an elastic band. And I think what's happening now is the tension on this elastic band has got to the point where it's kind of snapping back. So what's it snapping back to? Well, let's bring it down. Let's find a singularity. Well, it's snapping back to the old order. What was the old order? Well, basically, the old order was the people who were the most powerful had the best lives. It's as simple as that. If you were rich, if you were powerful, if you were a man, if you were a leader, if you had strength, if you had possessions, if you had land, that kind of thing, then you would be somehow in a not only advantageous position, but a position of extraordinary privilege. And then you would have the majority of people who weren't in that situation. Now, I think that because we are animals, then we haven't fundamentally changed, despite what you might imagine around you. I think that there is that animal part of us which will reject these progressive notions, and there will always be some form of tension. And I think simply what's happened is that for various macroeconomic reasons, those people who would benefit from a return to that kind of hierarchical situation have taken control and are managing to articulate to large groups of people successfully, for other reasons we won't go into necessarily now, that this kind of hierarchical situation will be good for them too, when clearly it won't be. I mean, it is literally the turkey voting for Christmas. So, for example, it's the Welsh farmer who votes for Brexit and then finds out that because he can't sell into Europe, he loses his business, but he still voted for Brexit. I mean, why would you do that? And afterwards complaining. So think about that. And then, of course, you've got the people voting for Trump, who will lose their Medicare. So there's something very strange going on. I mean, and we all know that they have these charismatic leaders. They appeal to a kind of primitive, visceral part of the population, So let's bring it back. So there is this huge chasm. So unlike the little birds on the rock who are living happily together, we're now in a civil war, in effect. I think that most people I know who are of one distinct group cannot bear to be anywhere near people of the other distinct group, and vice versa. And the fact that this has happened is a very bad omen indeed. Now, the only way that these groups now could come together in any way would be through a kind of overbearing crisis, an overbearing crisis that could would reaffirm the need to work together as a society in order to get things done. This could be war, of course, is the classic example. But it also could be issues to do with some form of emergency, climate emergency, or something similar to what happened under COVID, but even worse. Those kind of crises tend to bring communities together, and it doesn't really matter so much kind of how you feel ideologically. Although at the moment, this ideology, whether you're this group or the other group, is right at the heart of your identity. This is why politics has become a totally different game to what it was even 5 years ago, actually. And it doesn't help that there's so much noise around at the moment, and so much and misinformation that that in this post-truth world still gets a lot of traction amongst most people. For example, with the AI search engines and the AI bots now, it's very easy for those who own those companies to alter algorithms to make tendencies one way or the other, depending on their own particular politics. And so you can see these masses, they're moving as though they're tides, really, according to trends, memes, information streams, which are all controlled by by unaccounted individuals. But this is just the way the world's going. Can it ever be brought together? Probably not, no. Unless we have some form of nuclear war or Armageddon, or some sort of ridiculous crisis that would mean that there would be a call to arms for everybody, and that might realign some of this. But at the moment, I think there is a form of civil war going on. I mean, this civil war might not be open fighting in the streets, but it does mean that you have to be highly selective about who you hang out with, because there is absolutely no common ground at all between these two groups, which despise and hate each other. We all now stand on one side of the fence or the other. I mean, it's a very delicate business because, for example, brands, including YouTubers, including people who are on social media and the podcasters and opinion formers and newspapers and whatever, they have to tread very carefully. They either decide they're in one camp or the other, and that's fine. Like in the UK, we've got GB News and Talk TV, and they've decided that they're in the camp of sort of anti-woke, anti-Europe, anti-climate change, and they've decided that's where they're going to sit, and they get quite a nice. And this is you'll be familiar with many other people who've taken that stance, Fox News in America, but many others, of course, podcasters. And then, but you've got some who are trying to hedge their bets. Very difficult to do that because you only need to give one little flavour of where you stand, and that's it. You've lost half the audience. So, I mean, some people here may have thought that I was some form of conspiracy theorist or had ideas about conspiracy theory, or that I was, I don't know, could have been an anti-woke guy, and they'll find out that I'm not really like that, and then they'll just probably leave a comment saying, "Fuck off, you loser," or something, and they disappear. But as I said, I'm really only doing this because there's nowhere else to go anymore. I mean, nobody reads books anymore. Can't write the books. Music is now being developed on AI, so my music doesn't count. Nobody gives a damn about anything. Everything is done by AI. The public market out there is just full of people throwing their feelings at me. I'm not interested. I'll invite you with your feelings if you want that. And what are you left with? Well, you're left with just staring into a phone and chatting to it for half an hour every day, as your only form really of what's wrong with trying to express yourself? Nothing really, I suppose. And if it resonates with one or two people, even one person, then you could say, well, you know, it's not a total waste of time. And of course, as somebody who is semi-retired, I've got plenty of time in the day, and this only takes up half an hour. All right, so that was a chat about just about observing the chasm now, which I think is permanent, between two large groups who now can't see any common ground, can't come together. We're waiting for nuclear war, and then when we're having to rebuild, I don't think it will matter whether or not you were an anti-Europe or pro-Europe and all that bullshit. I think you'll still maybe help each other. One of you will lay the bricks, maybe the other one will cook a sausage on the barbecue if there's any meat left, and somehow you'll get that house finished. Until then, I feel sad for the young people in this world. For me, I lived through the glory time, post-war. There was money around, there were jobs around, there was a public forum. We kind of knew where we were in public. We didn't have to air our every feeling, all our feelings all the time. You know, we could wait until we found, you know, good friends to do that. And it was there was a kind of hope for the future. The idea was that the children are always better off with the parents. That's completely changed, and so it's a very, very difficult world now, and I do feel sorry for young people who are struggling really hard. So I hope you're not struggling anyway. Well, that's it for today. I think I'll call it a day. Again, rambling. Okay, thanks.